In the early 1800s, James Taylor White moved from Louisiana to the newly established country of Mexico in what's known today as Southeast Texas. In fact, this safety rest area is located on property that belonged to Taylor White, who wanted to extend his family's cattle business into Texas. Although he stated loyalty to Mexico, Taylor White played an important role leading up to the Texas War of Independence. In response to repeated violations of the nation's newly adopted Constitution, he and a contingent of other colonists gathered in 1832 in Turtle Bayou to draft the Turtle Bayou Resolutions, which voiced their complaints against the centralist dictatorship with a formal protest to the Mexican government. This event is thought by many to have taken place at White's homestead not far from this site. Taylor White, busy building his cattle ranching business, never fought in the Texas Revolution but was a passive supporter of the cause, giving food and shelter to the revolutionaries. But how could a cattle rancher make a living here? The land was marshy in some places and dry as a bone in others. Also, it was so remote that meat couldn't be shipped without spoiling. The only products he could export were hides for leather and fat for tallow. Cattle that did well in this area were a cross between Spanish breeds brought to the region more than 100 years earlier and English breeds, which together formed the mighty Texas Longhorns. So skinny they barely produced any fat at all, though they stood up to the heat, drought, and insects. A hard-working, no-nonsense man, Taylor White immediately set to work digging irrigation ditches, rounding up stray Spanish cattle, breeding Texas Longhorns, and establishing one of the first Anglo-American cattle operations in Texas. By the early 1830s, a visitor to Texas recording his travels described Taylor White as one of the wealthiest inhabitants in this part of Texas, with a fine estate on the prairie about 5 miles from Anahuac, a house of logs, and between 3,000 and 4,000 head of cattle. One reason for Taylor White's success was his idea for selling meat by shipping it live so that it wouldn't spoil. With no railroad to ship cattle, he trailed them overland on the hoof. This was long before the now famous cattle drives north took place. Indeed, the Spanish had run cattle from Texas to Louisiana along the Opelousas and Spanish trails to feed American revolutionaries. Taylor White followed the same trails, driving the cattle over land and swimming them across waterways to Louisiana, finally arriving by steamboat in New Orleans. Before long, neighboring ranchers sent their cattle with White's herd. Another ranching method that White introduced to Southeast Texas was burning the coarse salt grasses, which grew back tender and lush and easier for cattle to eat. The practice of controlled burns caught on like wildfire and continues today, especially in marshy areas where mowers bogged down. White's numerous descendants continue to thrive in this region, many of them maintaining the family ranching tradition. Great-great-great-grandson Bill White still uses the crossed W brand, which Taylor White inherited from his father in Louisiana. Employed in Texas as early as 1820, it may be the oldest brand in continuous use in Texas today. And with almost 200 years of operation, White Ranch is one of the longest-running ranches in Texas today. While still ranching on horseback, the Whites continue to make history with their innovative methods, like swimming their 3,000 cows across the 300 to 600-foot intracoastal waterway between their summer pasture on the Texas mainland and their winter pasture on High Island on the Bolivar Peninsula. Our knowledge of this pioneer family's history continues to grow. Before constructing the rest area buildings, archaeologists surveyed the site and studied the nearby White homestead, which was largely destroyed by Hurricane Ike in 2008. You can learn more about James Taylor White and the history of this region by visiting the Wallaceville Heritage Park, located a few miles west of here, and the Chambers County Museum in Anahuac.